And that's why we have iron. Oxygen, carbon dioxide. Okay. Whilst we're still in the vein, sorry, it was a bit of humour.
It was. It's like a bad dad joke, but it's all
And
right.
there was just
We're all
silence for a
tired.
second. It was a bad dad joke, but I'm good at those. We're going to talk about, we talked about clotting. We're talking about deep vein thrombosis, DVT. You'll hear a lot about it. Airplanes. People who sit in buses for a long time.
After
People
surgery.
who study a lot.
Doing
People who sit in office chairs. All those sorts of things. It is a huge, huge issue. Because they get it in their legs, it is extremely painful.
Can be
I've
deadly.
not had one, but anyone I've ever dealt with that's got a DVT, you touch it and they scream. So it is a blood clot that forms deep in the vein of the body. And you can get DVTs for a variety of reasons, and we mentioned those. And it's normally about the pooling of blood. Often an old lady has a fall in the house, is down for hours, ends up with a DVT.
I lost my best friend to one just over 12 months ago.
There you go. And I find that most people have had someone they know with a DVT and has had adverse results. I know a friend of mine lost his leg as a result of a DVT. He had trauma to his leg, but he lost it from the DVT.
Oh.
So a thrombosis, which is what that is, the thrombosis, is a blood clot. And you can read the rest of that. But it is a potentially serious health effect, right? You can get the risk of PE. You'll hear the term PE, pulmonary embolus. Anyone want to know what a pulmonary embolus is? Exactly. It's a clot. It travels through your system, goes into your lungs, makes a little hole in your lungs. And you can get a collapsed lung, or you get impaired breathing. And then that's when they stick the little ICG in there, intercostal catheter, and you see them out and they've got the little container beside them and they're walking along with the blood. You'll see a few of those when you go into your acute placement.
What did the E stand for, sorry?
Sorry?
Pulmonary embolism.
PE.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pulmonary, down here.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
It's all right.
Sorry. Yeah.
Pulmonary embolism, PE.
So that's a clot in the lung.
That is a clot that goes to your lung that causes damage.
If my dad gets those, or he's had it twice when he's had an operation.
Because what happens is they're laying down, the blood pools in their lungs a little bit,
Yeah.
and you get a little pop of it. It's very, very common after older people, after theatre.
That's why they put you on Flexane.
And they put you on
And they
those.
get
Blood
things
thinners.
like shoulder tip pain, and they go, oh, I've got this pain up here. And then the nurse goes, oh, let's get you checked out and scanned. So the thrombus breaks up. It comes off the vein. You can imagine it grows and grows in that vein and it breaks away because there's pressure against it all the time. It leaves the leg and lodges up into the pulmonary artery, which goes into the vein. Oh, into the lung, sorry. And you get a nice little clot in there and you put a little hole in your lung. That is a DVT. Right, I'll use my pointer. There. That's all clotted, all through there, all that dark area. It's a huge clot, isn't it? That's a very big example. Sometimes they're this big, sometimes they can go right up into the inner thigh. You'll get them spread from right down below the knee right through. And you touch them and they're what they call exquisite pain.
Exquisite.
They call it exquisite pain.
Doesn't sound appropriate.
But it is important because it's just a really intense pain, the slightest touch.
Yeah.
It'd be a great torture method. Gotta hope the nurse likes you in hospital.
Great.
painful person.
This video is from www.makemegenius.com. If you want to see more science videos, go to www.makemegenius.com. Oh, yeah, and it's free.
Do you know how we understand when something is hot or cold, or when something is sweet or bitter? Okay, it is our nervous system, which controls all of our senses, like taste, touch, sight, smell, etc. But, do you know what the nervous system is? Okay. Let me explain about the nervous system. The nervous system controls all the actions of our body. It has two parts, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is comprised of the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system consists of many nerves, which are spread throughout the body. Let's first understand the brain, its parts, and what they do. Our brain is the most complicated organ of our body. It has three major parts, the cerebellum, cerebrum, and brainstem, which is also known as the medulla. The cerebrum is the biggest part of the brain. It controls our senses, our imagination, and our thoughts. So, whatever we see, touch, taste, smell, think, or imagine is controlled by the cerebrum. The second major part is the cerebellum. It is known as the little brain. It controls our motion, balance, and our ability to learn new things. For example, you can walk without falling because of the cerebellum. Also, it helps with learning any new thing. The third major part is the medulla. It is also known as the brain stem. It does a few things, which are called involuntary actions. It controls our digestion, heartbeat, and breathing. These things happen automatically in our body. We don't have to put any effort here. So now you know about the brain. Can you remember it all? Good. The cerebrum is in charge of sensing, thinking, and imagination. Wow, you're right. The cerebellum is also responsible for muscle movement and control, and it also helps us in learning. Great. You're right about the medulla also. It is running our body from the inside. Now, do you want to learn about the peripheral nervous system? The peripheral nervous system is made up of many nerves, which are present throughout the body. The peripheral nervous system has two functions. Some nerves receive information, like when you taste something. These messages are carried to the brain by these nerves. The nerves which take the message from senses to the brain are called sensory nerves. Other nerves carry messages from the brain to the body. These are called motor nerves. They carry instructions from the brain to the body on what action to take. Like, for example, if you were eating chili, which the brain told you was bitter. So now you're doing a spitting action. All nerves are made up of neurons. A neuron has three major parts: a nucleus, which is the cell body, dendrites, and the axon. Dendrites take in the electric messages to cell bodies. Axons take the message away from the cell body. So dendrites are like entry to a parking lot, and axons are the exit route from parking. So, buddy, do you now know why the brain is important? Good.
So you're going to www.makemegenius.com.
And it is a very good little site to actually go to. I joined it because they have some very useful things on there. I'm not a genius site.
Was it Australian or American, that website?
.com, so I'd have to be.
It's an American-based website, but very interesting. So, we talked about in that little clip there the nervous system, so what it's made up of. So, the nervous system is our information highway, isn't it? It sends all our messages to tell all our bits and pieces what to do. It keeps us upright. It gives us all our senses. So that's really important. It makes us move. It makes us able to stand up and walk. So without those processes, we can't do very much without a functioning nervous system. So, as it said in the video, it consists of the central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal column, and the peripheral nervous system, which is all the nerves that run out to your limbs, that give you your ability to touch, the ability to feel what you're walking on, know that you're treading on a pin, know that you're picking up something hot, what you see the steam rising. So that processes and says, that could be hot, be careful. Okay? So the central nervous system, or the CNS, lies in the dorsal cavity of the body. So everyone knows what the dorsal cavity is. The back. Dorsal fin on a fish is its back fin. Dorsal cavity of the body. It's effectively the centre of our nervous system. So thus it's called the central nervous system. And it's the part that processes the information received from your peripheral nervous system. So whatever your senses feel, it sends it straight up your spinal column, up into your brain, to tell your brain what it's touching and sensing. Right? And it then reacts to that information coming in. So it receives the information, then transmits it out, back out to your peripheral system. So the brain and the spinal cord. So it receives and interprets information, either consciously or unconsciously. Because when we're asleep, we still have senses going. You dream, it's a part of your sense, it's your brain, it's your nervous system working. Snoring, your body, tells you when you snore, sometimes it will stop your breathing or it will make you turn over. It's all about the unconscious nervous system. And we talked about neurons, and I'll go on to those in a minute. So, we talked about a nerve impulse, right? How would you describe a nerve impulse? What do you think it is? We've said what it is.
A signal that
It's a signal, good.
conveys information.
That's it. So it's an electrical signal that conveys information along the neuron. So remember we talked about having the dendrites and the axon body. So, keep going. So there's that little picture we saw in the video. So the neuron cell body here. There's our axon. There's our electrical signal. There it goes up to a nucleus, again another cell body. So the communication between these two is called a synapse. And here, I get a couple of you, I know there's a few university lecturers that go, sorry guys, my brain's not synapsing today. Nothing connecting.
How do you spell that, Neville? Sorry, I can't read.
S-Y-N-A-P-S-E, synapse.
So it's a car park in, travelling and out.
Yep. So the information comes in here. So they're communicating with each one. So it travels in, as you can see here, right, from the axon tips to the next cell, into the neuron, or the cell body, right? That's the nucleus. That transmits it along the axon, back out to the axon tips, which then synapses with the next cell. And so it travels all that way up your body because it's not one long neuron. The brain. The brain's made up of three main parts. So you have a forebrain, a midbrain and a hindbrain. but it's divided up into other things as well. Right? So the forebrain consists of the cerebellum, the thalamus and the hypothalamus, and they're part of the limbic system. Don't worry about that too much, you'll come across that. The midbrain consists of the tectum, the tegmentum, right? And the hindbrain is made up of the cerebellum pons and the medulla, and often the midbrain pons and medulla are referred together as the brain stem. But we'll go into that a little bit. Won't go into that too deeply, but it's so you understand there are lots of different terms that can be used in the brain. So if you have a little look, the cerebellum or cortex is the largest part of the human brain. Okay? It's associated with our higher brain function. So what do you think our higher brain functions are?
Our thoughts, feelings,
Speech.
Movement.
So when someone has a stroke and they have a cerebral stroke, they will have damage to their cerebellum. So they'll lose their speech. And they may lose vision. And that's how they often work out where to look for the site of the bleed in the brain. Right? So it's a thought and action. Right? The cerebral cortex is divided up into 4 sections. They're called lobes, lobes of the brain. Right? There's a frontal, a parietal, an occipital and a temporal lobe. So there's a visual representation of the cortex. All right, let's go next. So what do each of these lobes do? So the frontal lobe, that's associated with reasoning and planning, parts of speech, movement, emotions and problem solving, higher brain functions. The parietal lobe is associated with movement, orientation, recognition, perception of stimuli, again, higher brain functions. The occipital lobe is associated with visual processing. And temporal lobe, associated with perception and recognition of auditory stimuli, memory and speech. So they all link in a little bit together.
Can you push it back?
Oh, sorry. Should be on your printout.
No, it's just got what the three,
It's
four
got the
are.
questions, but
Didn't give the answer.
no.
I thought I printed it all together. There you go. Printer didn't like that bit. That's okay. I actually thought I'd include it because it was a bit long. But that's good.
Neville.
All right. So you're saying I've got a big head? Something like that. I mean, please don't throw things at me.
Yeah, my son was involved in an accident when he was 11 and had a frontal lobe injury, and he didn't know who anybody was,
Yep.
and had to learn to walk, talk, everything from scratch.
So your higher brain functions, isn't it? It's amazing. And you recovered
It's
all
the
right?
days of our lives.
Love boat.
The love
Oh.
boat, yeah.
Has he recovered well?
He's 21 now.
Yep.
Yeah, and yes. Yeah, mostly.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Our brain's an amazing thing. Brain cells don't repair or don't get replaced. But we have a lot of excess in our brain, so it reroutes around issues they've discovered. It can
Amazing.
reroute its neurons around a damaged part, and we can get partial healing.
See 60 minutes.
Yeah, did you see that?
Yeah, that lady.
That's pretty amazing, wasn't it?
Yep.
I don't
What
watch
she did, I
TV.
didn't really understand what she was.
They didn't say what they put in.
What it
there,
was,
so
no, I
it's
didn't.
something to relax them. Well, to
I didn't understand exactly.
about
what
the chronic
was-
inflammation.
Yeah.
Strokes.
There's a lot, a huge amount of research going into strokes. They've got now pathways to recognise it, pathways to treat it, pathways to look after people at home with them. And it's all about relearning skills.
And time.
Time. And it's quite amazing how people recover. All right. Just out of interest, we have little, when babies are born, they have sutures in their skull. You see them? But when we get older, we have little gaps between each part of our brain. They're called the sulcus. And there's a central sulcus which goes over here, and the lateral sulcuses which go over there. You won't be asked that question, but it's just out of interest.
What do you mean
Is
by
that where they
sutures in
put
the
shunts and stuff for people that have tumours through the
Sulcus. Sulcus, yeah.
sulcus?
Yeah.
And that, but they go right down to people's stomachs, yeah?
Depends on the type. A lot of that, they would go straight into the brain. But that's just a division. It's only the division marking between each section of the brain.
It's my cousin John.
So, as you can see, temporal lobe, occipital lobe, there's our cerebellum and our brain stem. So what would that one be? Frontal lobe. It's at the front. And in that cerebellum down, got everything right, our medulla's in there.
So that cerebellum, that's at the back, is it?
The cerebellum is that whole brown area.
Yeah, is it at the back of your head, like where the neck?
Yeah, at the back of your neck. It's the lower, it's part of your brain stem. So when you get a brain stem injury, you can imagine it's a high risk, high damage area. Functions of the spinal column. So it's about protection. It protects the spinal cord, that's the spinal column, the nerve roots, and many of the internal organs, because it's behind there, organs are in front of it from the back. Base for attachment of our ligaments and muscles and tendons. Just shows how important the spinal column is. It's a structural support. It supports our head, doesn't it? Right? Flexibility and mobility. So how we move, how much we can move, is dependent on our spinal cord. Additional functions, it produces blood cells and it stores minerals like all bones. So it has a marrow. It also has mineral storage. So the roles of the spinal cord are
To protect. To protect.
Yep. So it's a sensory pathway, it's a motor pathway and a reflex centre. I'm going to be carried away there. So that's the role of the spinal cord. It's not what it does. It's the role of the spinal cord, not the spinal column. The column's the bony prominence down the back. And the cord's in the middle of all that. So the role of that is to protect the cord, the column. So the column protects the cord. So it's a sensory pathway, a motor pathway, and a reflex centre. You all know what we mean by reflexes? The old, when you tap you on the knee and your knee goes up, that's a reflex. Oh no, you wouldn't know about startle reflex, but they talk about babies and startle reflex, and they
they
drop
sweat
like that and they go like
Yeah.
that. That's a reflex. They lose that, but it's a startle reflex.
I hated that part.
All right? That should be written down, hopefully. The sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, just so you've got an idea that there's more than one and what they do. Basically, the sympathetic, right, dilates the pupils, right? Whereas the parasympathetic, when the event's over or the chemical release is done, whether it be adrenaline or something, the parasympathetic reverses that process. So it will constrict your pupil. It brings your vision back to normal, right? Right? Slows the heart rate, whereas the sympathetic nervous system increases your heart rate. You get your adrenaline release, the flight and fight response. You get the heart rate running, you're going to take off. The body goes, no, it's not that bad. So your parasympathetic nervous system, or the event's over, will slow you back to normal. Without a parasympathetic nervous system, we'd be going fast all the time. Yeah, but would you want your children to be like it?
No.
No. You'd never get a break.
Lazy.
So, it does things like, as I said, the parasympathetic constrict your bronchioles, right? But it doesn't affect the blood system, the blood vessels. But it does return digestion to normal. Slows down digestion. Okay? Which system is activated during times of stress? I've got under there, no.
Yeah.
Under the threat of fight or flight. The sympathetic nervous system. It's the one that's activated. Remember, parasympathetic counteracts it. So parallel to just does the opposite. It slows things down.
Sorry, Neville, I was waiting for you to swap sides so I could read. What was that? Sympathetic.
Sympathetic nervous system. That's all right, though. I don't mind going back.
Maybe to the dark side.
Yeah. Keep going over to the dark side. I'm seeing the light. They tell me I've got to move around the room more when I lecture. Apparently I stand over here and look across that way.
Be easy for me if you did. No, I'm only kidding.
No, I'm serious. It is.
Camera's there, so you know.
Exactly what Ben has told me. All people from careers, because I walk up and down to the camera and make it come in and out. Good fun. So, sympathetic nervous system. So, what is the function of the hypothalamus? We mentioned the hypothalamus. Down on the bottom here. The hypothalamus down on the brain stem. There. What do you think it would do? It's an interesting one, isn't it? So you've got to think about it. This will just prove how important it is, right? It actually regulates your body temperature. It's your body's thermostat. So you can imagine what a brainstem injury could do to someone. They can't control their own body temperature anymore if it damages the hypothalamus. So it tells your body how hot or cold it is. It would signal to your kidneys, wouldn't it? I mentioned the renal function. It would tell the blood to go to the surface. If you're hot, get cooled down. Which part of the brain coordinates voluntary muscle activity to help maintain balance and muscle tone? I mentioned it.
The cerebellum? That one?
Cerebellum.
That. Yeah!
Well done. The cerebellum. And just threw this one in because it'd be a good one to know.
We like that one. The star.
A problem involving the ocular motor nerve could cause, the picture's the hint,
Droopy eye, droopy eye.
droopy eyes. Pop the brain in there. Drooping of the eyelids. I couldn't get one with two droopy eyes. The respiratory system. This is my favourite video. Everyone's waiting to see what it is. As soon as the cardiac was run the pocket on. This is. And the last lot, when they did their exam, went through this. It was quite interesting. Just pop it up there.
Because it wants and moistens. It wants and moistens.
My daughter's never going to forgive you for that.
Neither's my oldest. She can crack it.
I came into an exam, the last lot, which was 12, and there was 5 people doing a reset, and 2 of them were singing that song.
Can I have a copy of that?
It'll go up on, hopefully go up on the thing. But if you go under the respiratory song on YouTube,
Okay.
There are lots of songs.
great story behind it about a grade 8 teacher who wrote it who's in a band.
I thought it was a doctor donated to me.
That was how I got through uni.
Yep,
It's basically like the sum up of everything.
I love it, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good way to remember stuff.
It is, absolutely. Except I would have sung it, but, you know, swooning or throwing veggies at me, something like that. One of those things.
Scalpels.
I think you'd see a comment from my daughter there if I said I'd sing it, please Dad, don't. So, the structure of the respiratory system, we know it now, because we can sing the song. Right? Basically, there's an upper respiratory tract and a lower respiratory tract. So, the upper, and you hear that term very commonly when you hear upper respiratory tract infection, urties they call them, and that person's got an urtie. You know, one of those, that,
We used
or
to have
that jargon.
8 a year. We used to have only have 8 urties a year.
Yep, that is jargon, but that's what it stands for. Upper respiratory tract infection. They don't call lower respiratory tract infections, they normally call them pneumonia or bronchitis or things like that. But as you can see, that's really the bronchial tree in your alveoli, which are the little bunches of grapes, the air sacs in your lungs.
Sorry.
So the lungs, the pleural membranes, right, collapse and expand the lung. There's ribs, the diaphragm, all each are part of that lower system, that lower respiratory system. So the respiratory system itself, right, it causes the exchange of gas. Right, it occurs at 2 sites, in the lungs and at the cells. Because what's it doing? It's transporting what it drags into the lungs through to the cells. Right, in the lungs across the membrane of the alveoli. So they're a large surface area. Your lungs are a large surface area, really thin walls. Right, all the blood flows through on that little branches, and the pulmonary capillary and the alveoli proximity sucks up the oxygen. So the respiratory system, control of breathing. Right, you have neural control. And look, it's down in that lower part of that brain again, isn't it? In here. So brainstem injury. Centre for breathing is found in the medulla. We mentioned the medulla before. It's called the medullary respiratory control centre because it's in the medulla. And we have chemical control. Right, chemicals in the blood stimulate the chemoreceptors in the medulla and also in the carotid arteries. So, common disorders of your respiratory system, obviously the common cold. Influenza, all the different types you can get now. You know, the H1N1, all those sorts of things. Asthma. So what's asthma?
Restricting of
Inflammation of the
So you get, sorry, I heard,
inflammation of the bronchi.
the bronchitis.
Oh,
Restricted airway.
it's yeah.
So asthma is normally in your lungs. You'll get a wheeze in your lungs. It's restriction of your alveoli.
That's what I was looking
And is that usually the end product of bronchiolitis?
No. It can be an end product of it, but it's not always. Some people can be asthmatic and they're not sure. Sometimes it's triggered by what they breathe in. It might be triggered by an allergic reaction and a release, right? Or they not release of the histamine, so they don't dilate up and they get that wheeze. And you get, when someone's got a really bad asthma attack, you'll hear the wheeze up in the upper airway. That's when they give them a bronchial dilator. So you'll get that, it'll dilate up the airways into the alveoli, and that's when they give them their ventolin.
Is that the blue puffer?
Yeah, there's the blue puffer
And then the
there's-
twisties,
yeah, you can get
the
the
bronchial
turbo
twisties.
hailers, yeah.
Yeah.
Pulmocort's one of them. Can't think of